Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is flow. So, what we're going to talk about is how we can invoke a greater experience of flow and fluidity in our lives, how we can generate a sense of grace, a greater sense of alignment with the flow of life. So before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. Great to have you here this morning and great to be here with everybody else who's joining us. And today we're talking about flow and how we can invite greater flow in our lives. And one of the keys, I think, to this notion of flow is releasing resistance. So when things don't go our way, we might rail against the fates. We might fight. We might complain, make up whole stories, get deeply enmeshed. Good morning, April. So good to have you here with us. Welcome. We're talking about flow. And so when things don't go our way, we tend to create a lot of resistance around it. And we have our temper tantrum, so to speak, because things aren't going the way we want them to go. And I had a situation like that this morning, which is why this topic for now. And that was where I had a scheduled meeting earlier this morning, and I got up and actually rushed explicitly to make that meeting. And then at the last minute, I checked and saw that there was a message from the person I was meeting with saying that they needed to reschedule. And so part of me was just, like here I was, I rushed to be here for this meeting, and now the person's not present for it. And then I just allowed myself to remind myself that life is happening for me and through me rather than to me. And this is just a wonderful, wonderful vehicle for me anyway, to help myself get more aligned with the flow of life and to recognize that if life is happening for me, then there's an opportunity for me in the fact that I was up and ready for business, so to speak, earlier than usual. And I took full advantage of that time. It gave me the opportunity actually to do some things that really needed doing that I hadn't been able to put my attention to. And it was a really good thing. It worked out really, really well. And it worked out really well in large part due to the fact that I was able to adjust my attitude pretty quickly and to not, excuse me, sorry about that, to not linger in my expectation that had been frustrated. So rather than to continue feeling frustrated or have a whole conversation, good morning, Dido. Welcome. So good to have you here with us. Um, thank you. April says, bless you. I sneezed. Thank you. So I'm bouncing around, by the way. I just got this wonderful ball, exercise ball. And apparently it's supposed to be good for you to sit on these things because it helps you, keep balancing yourself. And it's fun anyway. It's fun to bounce. So if you see me bouncing, that's why. It's not intentional necessarily, but every time I move, it kind of bounces. Anyway, so allowing ourselves to go with the flow of life is such a profound gift, and it allows for all kinds of discoveries and opportunities that we wouldn't have if we keep resisting it and saying, I want it to be this way, and trying to force things into the direction that we want them rather than flowing and dancing with life and what it presents. And this notion, this hypothesis that I'm working with that has really been transformational for me is this notion that life is happening for me and through me rather than to me. And if life is happening for me, then I can just allow that, okay, I thought it was going to go one way, it's gone another, and now what? And it presented this wonderful opportunity for me to do some things that really needed, that were really calling for attention. And I wouldn't have had that opportunity had I not gotten up for that meeting and had that meeting not been canceled. So Rosalind says resistance to change, wanting things to stay the same or wanting things to stay the way we want them to be, having things show up the way we want them to be. So used to a certain circumstance that has kept myself alive. If things are changing, that thought does help. Things are happening for me, not to me. Yeah, and things are changing, and we are likely to be experiencing profound change in the not distant future. And the more we resist change, the more resistance we create in life, the more impeded the flow. And why not find a way to be more fluid with it? Because when we experience all kinds of grace, and we experience all kinds of wonderful circumstances that we didn't necessarily anticipate. And so, we don't necessarily always see ways that life is happening for us. Like if we have certain conditions that are showing up in life that are particularly challenging in one way or another, it's not necessarily apparent how that might be serving us. I heard a really interesting thing on NPR over the weekend. Was somebody doing research around this notion that trauma creates growth. And that's actually something that we talk about here quite a lot, is not necessarily that trauma by default creates growth, but that we have the opportunity when we experience circumstances that are not to our liking necessarily. We have the opportunity, after going in, processing, we need to recognize the need to be able to process these things. Otherwise, it's just spiritual bypassing, where, we try to convert something by denying our own feelings and experience. But once we process something, then we have the opportunity to look for the opportunity. And so, at this moment, I've been having back pain for the past, I guess it's maybe 2 weeks now, and I thought it would heal by itself. Well, it hasn't. And so it's like, well, what's the opportunity in this? And um, it may be to find a healthcare practitioner that is somebody that can be a huge contribution to me. So, I'm looking into a chiropractor or whatever, but I don't know what the opportunity is. And even though I'm uncomfortable, um, I'm still living from the space life is happening for me. So I get to see what the opportunity is. When we look for miracles, when we look for opportunities, we tend to find them. When we look for the next thing that's going to go wrong, we tend to find that as well. So April says, going with that flow of thinking of for me and not to me. Oh, going with the flow of thinking of for me and not to me can bring in compassion for others, knowing it's happening for others also, as life is here for us all. Exactly, April. Exactly. And it allows us maybe to be present for others. I mean, it's very hard when you see people going through horrible, horrible tragedies. To imagine that life is happening for me rather than to me. And I don't know that I can reconcile that. And I wouldn't be so righteous as to try to impose that on someone else. What I can say is that this perspective is something that deeply serves me in being able to face challenges in life. Rosalind says adapting has an element to it, like the way I am is unacceptable. Perhaps that is being overcritical of self. Hmm. Um, Adapting. Well, I think that often we hold on to who we think we are, um, in ways that keep us limited. If I'm needing to find, I think that actually by finding flow, we're actually better able to have fuller expression. That it's not a violation of who we are. It's not saying there's something wrong with me. It's expanding my own capacities. It's finding greater um, alignment with life and self. And maybe it's not a matter of the how I am is unacceptable, but because if I'm frustrated or whatever, does that mean that that's unacceptable? Or if I'm having a temper tantrum, is that unacceptable? I don't think it's a matter of it being unacceptable. I think it's a matter of creating our own suffering. That through our resistance. So I guess I'm getting your point. Like if I adapt to anything, then who am I? But in a way, I think that we have the ability to find that flow, to gain even greater expression, even greater sense of who we are, rather than um, I'm not talking about violating one's principles, not at all. But but engaging in the dynamic dance of life with one's principles. So can I have principles that I express through anger that I could also express through love? Are there common principles that I could choose my mode for which I could choose my mode of expression, right? So by being rigid, am I upholding my values, or is there a way that I can uphold my values and also be in the flow of life's changes? I think that being in the flow doesn't mean necessarily being complicit or complying or being critical of oneself or being unacceptable. I think we have a lot more range and capability than we recognize. We have a lot more creativity than we recognize. And again and again and again, curiosity is the magic that can allow us to expand into those capacities, I think. To say, okay, well, here's a value that I have, and it feels perhaps it feels like that value is being violated, and how can I respond that is in alignment with my other values or my higher values? It was really interesting. I had a great conversation with my mom yesterday, and one of the things that we were discussing was a statement that she made about how other people can turn your virtues against you, and that was something kind of to be guarded against. And in exploring that, we started looking at, well, what would that be for somebody to turn your virtues against you? So for instance, many of us are generous in nature and want to think the best of people. And I know for myself, because I have been, I'm going to say, I want to say naively trusting, but I also want to say oblivious, like willfully oblivious. Those two things coupled together are a really lethal combination, right? If you're naively trusting and also oblivious to the signals, or in denial about the signals, or not paying attention, then it's easy for someone to take advantage of you. So I was recounting a time when I was in New York City. I came from the train to get a cab, and some guy came over to me and he said, "Here, I'll get you a cab. Just give me," I don't know what I was thinking. I was being oblivious, right? "Give me some money and I'll go get you the cab." And of course, I'm baffled that I did this, but I gave him some money, and of course he disappeared. And so I was being naively trusting and willfully oblivious because I wasn't paying attention. I was kind of just caught up in all the distractions that I wasn't really, I wasn't thinking solidly. I wasn't really present. And so that was kind of somebody turning my virtues against me. But was it really a virtue to be willfully oblivious? Was it really a virtue to be um, that naively innocent or oblivious? So I don't know, the things that we consider virtues, and that was actually a whole part of the conversation too, actually, was what's a virtue? Because the notion of a virtue versus a virtue is a value judgment, right? It's saying I'm virtuous. This is something good, like inherently good, where that has a righteousness to it that could be very dangerous. I mean, I imagine that the people who were conducting the crusades and the murderous rampages in the name of the church and God, I imagine that they considered that they were virtuous. And they were virtuous, especially in contrast to those people who were not. And they were smiting the non-virtuous, I guess. So when we create these hierarchies of power or virtue, I think there's a danger inherent to that. Anyway, so how does this get back to flow? Where we're talking about how maybe going with the flow or finding flow, finding a lack of resistance is a violation of self, or choose, a verdict on oneself somehow that we're not acceptable as we are. I'm not saying there aren't things that need to be addressed. I just don't know that a direct, sometimes I guess a direct onslaught is perhaps the most appropriate path. Um, I think that flow can dictate that as well. When we allow life to flow through us, when we allow ourselves to be guided by life rather than to be asserting our um, our will on that. I think if we assert our intention rather than will, there's a qualitative difference that expresses itself very differently in how life then manifests. So April says virtues and values are user preference, and the flow helps us find higher value choices. I think that's really true. I think that as sometimes we need to step off our ego position and allow for a service to our higher values. So, for instance, do I want to be right or do I want to be connected? And if I want to be connected, my conversation is going to be very different from if I'm insistent upon being right. So I heard another thing on NPR yesterday that was interesting. I didn't get to hear the entire thing, but it was about conflict and how we find a place of communication into opposing viewpoints. And this one woman had spent years and years creating conversational spaces that were open conversations for understanding, where people from opposing vantage points would be able to be engaging in ongoing conversation to share a perspective, and how that's been very healing, where people have been able to find some kind of connection, some kind of deeper understanding of one another, even across differences, and greater respect, etc. And then they also mentioned that there was somebody who had developed this massive email campaign to communicate with Russian people about the truth of the Ukraine conflict and how this approach of communion kinds of conversation was less effective than a harsher conversation or a big flashing light kind of conversation, even just creating a link. And the foundation of that difference was that one of the approaches was grounded in an ongoing relationship. The other was a communication between strangers. So how do you gain someone's attention and gain an inroad into changing hearts and minds? Anyway, sort of a wide ranging flowing conversation today, right? So the question is, how can we manifest greater flow? And I think the big thing is that when we recognize resistance within ourselves, what we're doing, when we have that resistance, what we're doing is we're cutting off the flow. We're cutting ourselves off from the flow of life. So, okay, we don't like this, that, or the other thing. Now what? Instead of, I'm going to stay stuck in, I don't like this and it's not okay, and getting into a whole story and creating all that resistance and closing ourselves off to the vitality of life. Instead, let's find ways to allow ourselves to open more into the flow, into the opportunities, into the potentials. So that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you, as always, to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. And also, as always, I just deeply, deeply appreciate you and the opportunity to spend this time and have these wonderful conversations together and be on this journey together of discovery. So until next time, so